The first presentation I will be doing will be looking at immunity. And as Rui expressed, I do love all things natural, what we can do for ourselves to help whatever health concern you have. So that will be the first one that we'll address. The next one, if you choose, I'm going to give you a bit of a fast runway tour through herbalism. It's a real passion of mine, using herbs to treat a whole range of chronic diseases and simple diseases as well. So I've got that prepared, but like I said, it's up to you guys. I'll give you the choice at the end. I'll wait till I finish this one before I ask. So anyway, let's start with the first one. So immunity. So one of the great issues that we have today is the rise in infectious diseases. We thought we kind of won the war on this particular problem back in the early 20th century, and we did seem to do a pretty reasonable job for some time. However, in the last few decades, particularly well into this 21st century, we're seeing this tide of infectious disease rise again. In medical terms, we are moving pretty much from this age of chronic disease, which includes all the things you know about, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, respiratory disease, arthritis, all those sorts of things, into the age of infectious diseases. Now, it doesn't mean we've won the war on chronic disease, quite the contrary. The two are now running concurrently. So, if infectious diseases are starting to take centre stage again, then we need to look at what we can do to basically optimise things for ourselves, because what we have as treatment options in the medical field is very tenuous at best. So let's have a look a bit about this age of infectious disease that we're talking about. So currently, infectious disease is the #1 killer of children worldwide. Previously, the unheard of infections are now appearing quite rapidly, more than any time in history, and never have there been so many new diseases that have appeared in such a short period of time, and that trend is continuing. So it's prompted the medical historians to dub this, obviously, the era of emerging plagues. So some examples. So there's a re-emergence of infectious disease. Some examples include HIV, MERS, SARS, which included the COVID-19, Lyme disease, hantavirus, dengue fever, Ebola, Zika, and they're just a few that we have currently put up there. Now, we are also seeing the emergence of diseases that we thought had practically eradicated. So diseases such as tuberculosis. I have diagnosed 3 in the last 12 months in my practice. Cholera, whooping cough, they're all increasing again. And of course, we have an increasing number of superbugs. We all know about those. That's been a problem for quite a long time. And these are infections that have become very resistant to what we currently use, so our antibiotics. And to be fair, we haven't really been able to produce a new antibiotic of a particular kind, like most of them are within the same kind, for well over 2 decades. So we really are in a bad way. So what are the causes? We might wonder, how on earth, with all these modern medicines, how do we get to this point of this infectious disease rising again? Well, there's a few reasons. We have now national and global travel, don't we? Never has the world been so connected physically in the ability to travel around the world. It's not just people travelling, we're also getting lots of other commodities travelling, animals are travelling around the world. So we're getting a movement of a lot of these pathogenic bugs across borders, aren't we? So we're seeing a lot of that happening at a faster and greater rate than we've ever seen before. So every country on this planet, there's no exception, is becoming more and more urbanised. So what do we mean by that? Well, more than 1 billion people live in slums worldwide, and as the global population increases, the cities are becoming far more crowded than they ever used to be. So currently, more than half the world's population are city dwellers. So that's about 6 out of every 10 people live in a very condensed city, and that is expected to double in the next 20 years. So we're talking, in astronomical amounts. 100 years ago, less than 400 million, or only about 2 out of 10 people were city dwellers. So you can see the very big difference there. So slums and high-density cities are the perfect breeding ground for a whole range of infectious diseases, and obviously it makes it more likely to spread as well. Poverty has always been with us, and that is certainly pervasive around the world. Some current figures: the richest 1% own half the world's wealth, and just the top 81 billionaires have more wealth than the 50% of the world combined. So you can see how disparate there is in the population. So interestingly, through the pandemic, 2/3 of the wealth gained were funneled straight into that top 1% of the world's richest. So obviously, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So nearly 10% of the world currently live in extreme and desperate poverty. But even in the developed world, we're talking about places like Australia, we're seeing about 25% of the population really struggling and getting on that borderline to poverty. So impoverished people will always have poorer nutrition, poorer access to care, obviously having issues with shelter and hygiene and a host of other things, which makes it more likely to get uncontrolled outbreaks of infectious disease. So definitely a major issue for us. Now, this is a big one that people don't often think about. Now, obviously, its claim to fame is through the green agenda, but its claim to fame is also really in the area of infectious diseases. So very much agriculture is linked to mass deforestation. Now, so in addition to the devastating effects, obviously, it has on the environment, it's also bringing farm animals and wild animals into close proximity. So there are pathogens that are quite quickly transforming from the wild population into those populations, and then those diseases are then very quickly through a small number of vectors getting into humans as well. So there was actually an example of this that led to a really bad outbreak in the 1990s. I'm just going to share what happened. They cleared about 10 million acres of forest in Borneo and Sumatra. They burnt it all. There was a mass migration of bats, and some of them were nesting in mango trees overlying some mass Malaysian pig farms. These bats dropped urine and pieces of fruit with their saliva into the pig pens, and it contained a virus that was benign to the bat, but deadly to the pigs. In turn, those sick pigs infected the other farm animals and the people, as well as devastating a whole variety of other things in our area. And it was a virus called the Nipah virus. Now, they transported those pigs around the country, of course, for food, and the virus started to spread. It was thankfully quickly recognised by the authorities, and within 7 months there was a mass slaughter of the pigs, and they were able to halt the virus in its track. The frightening part of the story wasn't that, though. It was that if you got this virus, you had a 40% chance of dying. So you barely made it. Most of the people barely made it through. And that's the sort of thing that we're starting to deal with. This is what's actually happening. Aside, like I said, from the whole green agenda, there's a massive issue here with infectious disease. And finally, again, not often recognised, chronic disease. Sorry, I'll just go down to the next one. Does that go right? Yep, chronic diseases are frequently found in a lot of the Western world, and the immune system of these individuals is often very depressed. So that makes them more likely to get infectious diseases as well. So we need to address a few different issues here. As a doctor, I really can't do much about the first few at all, but I certainly can help with the final one. So now we have just all experienced the big pandemic, haven't we? All the difficulties and challenges, whether you believe it was a real pandemic or not. But there was consequences, not to just our health, but also economically and socially. So the question is, and it will always be asked, will this happen again? If so, will it be more deadly? And the predictions so far from a lot of the experts in this area is that we probably are on the brink of a much more catastrophic infectious disease, most likely in the form of some sort of influenza virus. So that's the prediction. It is just that. It's not an actual prophecy. Now, we've all heard of plagues of biblical proportions, haven't we? But students of the Bible, we're obviously very aware of some prophecies from the Bible that give us some insight into what's happening. If we look in the book of Luke, we will find this amazing prophetic look at what the planet Earth will look like and what we will be experiencing at the time just before Jesus returns. And so we find there that when Jesus was asked what signs we should look for, what will herald his second coming, he says this to them: nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes in various places and famines and pestilences. and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. So all of these things are pretty much happening before our eyes, but in the midst of that prediction is that word pestilence, which is another word that we can use for infectious disease. So we can expect infectious disease will be a concern at this time in history. So if the pandemic is a real possibility, let's look at what we can do for ourselves. The first and foremost thing that you can do is to boost your immune system. If your immune system is in its prime state, without any inflammation or oxidative stress going on in the body, you will be able to fight most infections. You will win the war against most of the diseases that are out there. Now, we're going to look into some simple ways of what we can do to maximise your health. Now, the second one is, don't be alarmed, just be prepared. It's a mantra, but it's important not to be worried, but just make sure you have things in place. And I'll give you a simple natural first aid kit to have at home towards the end of the talk. So, always a good start to a talk on natural health is lifestyle. Things that you can do for yourself to address your immune system. Now, I always like to start with exercise because it's probably the hardest one. Sorry, can anyone hear me? Yeah. Lost it. It's probably the hardest one to actually implement. So, essentially, research is telling us that you can halve your risk of developing any sort of cold and flu by just doing regular, moderate exercise. So exercise has been really shown to impact that oxidative stress in your body and boost many of those innate, those deep down immune factors, making it 5 times stronger, 500%, 5 times stronger to fight infections. It also improves your sleep, which will lower your stress and anxiety levels, which are also implicated in your immune function. Now, how much is enough? There's no rocket science to this at all. It is very simple. It's half an hour a day of something that will make you huff and puff at least 5 to 6 times a week. That's doable, isn't it? If you're not doing that, then you're not getting enough exercise. So if you're getting out and it's making you breathe a little harder and puff a little harder, then you'll know you're doing the right thing. If it's just a leisurely walk, that won't work. So push that walk a little bit faster to make you huff and puff. And as you get fitter, you can do more and more of those things. Now, this is a really interesting one. Let's go for a bushwalk. You might go, what on earth am I talking about? Well, there is a fancy term in medicine, and they call this forest bathing. But here in Australia, we don't forest bathe, we go for a bushwalk. So, research has shown that walking in a forest with trees that release aromatic compounds, these are the essential oils found in the leaves of the trees, can boost a variety of immune factors. And I'm going to share with you a little study they did in Japan. It was very interesting, particularly because they did eventually use medical students in the end, which is always interesting for me. But first of all, they got a group of businessmen who were very stressed, high level, worked 7 days a week, just stressed out of their noggins. But they sent them off for a weekend in a forest. And they just got them to stroll through the forest. It wasn't an exercise regime, it was just a stroll through the forest. Can't remember how many hours they did, but it was, I think, about 2 or 3 hours a day. So they strolled through the forest, they measured their immune factors beforehand, and then they measured it after they had done this particular little holiday. And they found there was an astronomical climb in a whole bunch of different immune factors. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if it's because we just de-stressed these men for a few days, and maybe that's what happened. So they did something different. They sent another group of businessmen on another holiday, but this time it was at a resort. So there was no trees, it was just a nice relaxing weekend. They probably had massages and all sorts of things. They measured their immune system before and after. What do you think happened? Yeah, some minor benefits, but not much. So they went back and thought, well, what was it about the forest that made the difference? So I thought, you know what, we'll measure what's in the air of this forest. We'll have a look and see what's actually in there to see if there's something they're breathing in that's causing this. And they did find these essential oils that were actually in the air, these aromatic compounds. So what they did was they measured them and then they replicated that with a little blend of essential oils. This is where the medical students came in. There's no one more stressed than medical students, believe me. So they got a group of medical students, didn't send them on a holiday at all, just had them working their usual 14-hour shifts, but through the night, they were to put these blends in their diffuser and just basically breathed it in through the night. They measured their immune system before and after. What do you think happened? They had a really big rise in their immune factors, despite the stress and despite the fact that they hadn't taken them out of that environment. Just by having those aromatic compounds in the air was enough to get that boost in the immune system. The other interesting thing was the effect lasts for 1 week. So how hard is it just for 1 day a week to go out and walk in the bush? They might ask, what sort of bush? Eucalyptus is number one. How hard is that in Australia? Pretty easy, isn't it? Okay, so eucalyptus, but also cypress, pine and fir trees do produce a long-lasting effect. Now, you can diffuse these essential oils, there's no doubt about that. You can certainly get eucalyptus oil very readily and cheaply here in Australia, and that will be certainly helpful in boosting immunity. But you don't get the quite as good stress response. So I always would recommend taking a walk rather than using a diffuser. Good nutrition. Again, it's a bit of a no-brainer, and you'll probably think some of this stuff is boring, but research is showing this is exactly what we need. The best diet is the whole food plant-based diet. It wins hands down against all other diets for boosting your immunity. So what do I mean by whole food plant-based? Pretty much all your fruits, your vegetables, your legumes, your nuts, your whole grains in their freshest, most least processed forms. Now, obviously, they're all very rich in all the anti-inflammatory antioxidants. They've got antiviral compounds in them. They've got lots of immune-boosting nutrients. So this is definitely the best diet. The other one that won a lot of accolades when it comes to immune boosting is a low-fat diet, which naturally speaking, the whole food plant-based diet fits that. However, any diets that had high animal products, saturated fats and processed foods tend to be very pro-inflammatory and depress the immune system. Now we're going to have a look at some simple nutrients that are very helpful. Not because I'm suggesting you supplement. Rarely does supplement work better than the food that you can get it from. But here's some to use and the foods that we can get them from. Now, vitamin C. So a very common one to find in that whole food plant-based diet. It is an essential antioxidant, an essential vitamin, well known for its role in enhancing immunity. Now, there's no consensus on dosing of vitamin C, but fantastic sources include pretty much all of your guavas, sweet yellow peppers, currants, strawberries, leafy greens, citrus fruits, all those sorts of things are fantastic sources of vitamin C. Has anyone heard of the Kakadu plum? It's an Aussie superfood when it comes to vitamin C. It has 10 times more vitamin C than an orange, and it gives you more than 5 times a daily recommended intake. So if you have access to Kakadu plum, first of all, let me know where I can get a tree of it, and then secondly, take that one. The other one is NAC, otherwise known as N-acetylcysteine. This did become quite famous throughout COVID. It is an antioxidant that has very powerful effects when it comes to influenza, not so much the COVID, that wasn't as clear. So this is to do with a normal flu. So although it won't prevent you from getting the infection, the research shows that only 25% of those infected with the virus developed symptoms if they were taking NAC, compared to nearly 80% who developed symptoms when they were not taking NAC. So clearly it's a good one to help with the flu. It definitely has that antiviral significance. Naturally, you can get this quite readily. It's in legumes and sunflower seeds. Now, the recommended dosage, if you do plan to take it, is 600 milligrams twice a day in the winter season. Now, I will caution you on this one. Lots of people don't realise that it's not always the safest thing to take. So if you are highly allergenic, hives, asthma, eczema, hay fever, those sorts of things, or if you are prone to stomach ulcers, don't take this supplement. It will certainly worsen things for you. So just bear that in mind. Now, zinc, very important role for our immune defence. So high levels of zinc inside our cells will decrease the replication of RNA viruses. Now, remember, COVID-19 is an RNA virus. So it does decrease the replication there. So healthy zinc-containing foods will include all of your whole grains, oats, brown rice, for example. but also legumes and beans, cashews and almonds are all great sources of zinc. Be careful with supplementation of this one as well. So if you take it long term in high doses, it actually prevents the absorption of other really important nutrients, including copper. So my advice, if you're going to use zinc, keep it well below about 40 milligrams, probably 20 is more than sufficient. If you do get a cold or a flu, you can very temporarily take it up to about 200 milligrams a day, just for a week or so, and then if you want to keep taking it, drop it down to that lower level. But yes, you can get it naturally from your diet, so it's not an absolute. Quercetin is another beautiful one, found naturally in red onions, carob, for those who love their carob, cranberries, red delicious apples, watercress and asparagus. This is some examples. Now, it has been implicated in a whole variety of things, not just as its antiviral properties, but also it has anti-cancer properties as well. So with regards to its effect as an antiviral, it acts as what we call a zinc ionophore. So it basically binds the zinc and pulls it into the cell. So it stops the replication of the virus once it gets in there. If you were to supplement, it's a dose of about 500 milligrams twice a day. No warnings on that one. Now, selenium, it really does have a key role in strengthening your immune system as well. It reduces the oxidative stress and prevents viral infections that way. It also has some very mild anti-clotting benefits. So that was particularly helpful with COVID, where it was known to cause a bit of clotting. It's found naturally very, very high in Brazil nuts. In fact, 2 to 4 Brazil nuts will give you more than sufficient supply. If you were supplement, again, no more than 500 micrograms, that's not milligrams, that's micrograms, because you can develop selenium toxicity, and you don't want that. Now, magnesium. So multiple immune supportive roles. You could probably do a whole lecture on this one alone. Really helps to reduce those who are susceptible to viral infections. Natural sources, very easy to find. Again, all your leafy greens, nuts and seeds and legumes, all your whole grains, they all contain plenty of magnesium. Melatonin, now this is not a nutrient per se, although it is found in some foods such as pistachios, but it's a natural substance that we produce from our pineal gland in our brain, but it's an extremely potent antioxidant. It really does cause a lot of dampening down of oxidative stress in our body. So what we need to do is look at what we can do to enhance that. Now, as you get older, you will produce less and less of it, unfortunately. So there are some simple things that we can do to foster the development or the production of this hormone, and that's by turning off all unnecessary lights in the evenings. So, and that about an hour and a half before bed's the best time to do it. So you dim the lights down as much as you can, and particularly avoid light on the blue light spectrum. Where do we get that light from now? Where's the blue light spectrum? Yeah, on all our devices, whether it's TV screens, computer screens, devices, they're all built to blue light spectrum. Now, of a morning, blue light spectrum is fantastic. When the sun rises, it's predominantly the blue light spectrum that wakes our body up. But as the sun sets, we're moving into more of a yellow light spectrum. And we have to try and replicate that. So if you have a blue light at night in that hour and a half before bed, you suppress your melatonin production by 99%. Okay, so it's a huge dampening down. Now, if, like I said, it's a really, really powerful antioxidant, fantastic on the immune system. If we're doing that one simple thing, you'll get a major immune boost by doing that alone. If you do supplement, and there's certainly even over-the-counter medication now for some age groups, but you can get it as a medication from your doctor. Usually it's about 3 to 5 milligrams about an hour before bed. Now, weight management, always an important one. Keeping a close eye on your weight is very important because of the inflammation that it causes. Now, exercise and diet are always important factors here, but it's really that chronic low-grade inflammation that being overweight and obese causes the damage, both to bring on other chronic disease, but also reduce your immune system. Excuse me. So weight management will reduce your inflammation significantly. It will improve your immune function, many aspects of your immune system. You will certainly reduce the number of infections and get less severe symptoms when you become ill. And obviously you will reduce your risk of any sort of chronic diseases, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, all of these things which have been associated with much higher severity disease of any sort of infection, whether it's influenza, colds, or COVID-19. Now, with regard to the COVID-19, it was something that we saw quite early on, that people who were overweight and obese were getting much more severe disease and more frequently dying than people who were of regular, well-managed weight. And there's a reason for that, and that was because fat cells are very rich in a receptor called the ACE receptor. And that was the entry point for the COVID-19 virus. Okay, so that was one of the reasons why we were seeing that, because of these cells that were coated so well with these basically welcome doors for the COVID-19. This is a no-brainer, but we'll go through a couple of things with this again. So avoid alcohol. Drinking alcohol every day or on most days will suppress and weaken your immune system significantly. Those who consume alcohol are much more likely to catch colds, flus, and other viral or bacterial illnesses than those who don't drink. Thank you. And the symptoms of the infections also last longer and are more severe and intense when you're a drinker. Smoking, and I will have to put on here vaping as well. I haven't updated that. That has become a huge issue. So we all know that smoking causes quite severe lung disease and heart disease and cancer and all those things, but it does have a profoundly bad effect on your immune system. There are so many immune suppressing chemicals, and that includes nicotine, found in cigarettes. And of course, smokers are far more susceptible to both infectious and autoimmune diseases as well. So another reason to not smoke. Now let's talk about fever. We're a bit obsessed with our fevers in this society, but I will have to say to you that fever is your friend. Fever is there to enhance your immunity. It mobilizes your immune system and all those factors that will help you fight your infection. So basically, any elevated body temperature that a fever does will directly inhibit viral replication, particularly with influenza. And the thermal effect of a fever on the body has always been associated with better survival rates and shorter duration of disease caused by an infection. Generally speaking, especially when I worked in pediatrics, we rarely resorted to using paracetamol or any of the other ones that we use for fever unless we got close to the 40-degree mark. So if your temperature's not close to there, don't treat it unless, of course, you have headache or you just, obviously can't get rest or anything like that. But generally speaking, fever is there as your friend. So sweat it out. Let that virus be overtaken by immune system, which is what you want to happen. Now, drinking water. Again, that seems like a simple fact, but we found that 8 glasses a day are recommended for a good reason in this. Those who only drink about 2 to 3 glasses of water a day increases their chance of getting a flu, a cold, stuffy nose, any of those viruses, 400 to 500 fold. So we're talking 400 to 500% more, so 4 to 5 times more. So just by drinking that much versus having 8 glasses a day. We know that viruses hate well-hydrated bodies. The more dehydrated you are, the more the virus will replicate. So drink your water, especially when you're going through a virus. Now, sleep. Always a pretty hard one to get, isn't it? But a good night's sleep, what's the magic number there? It's 7 hours per night for most adults. Kids are obviously a bit different. So studies have been shown that individuals who've been inoculated in the nose, so they actually put a bit of virus in there with like a rhinovirus or one of the common cold viruses, are less likely to develop symptoms if they've had 7 or more hours sleep when compared to the sleep-deprived individuals. When is the best time? The hours before midnight. So the old wives' tale of early to bed, early to rise. I think there's a few Bible verses that would support that one as well. The hours before midnight, and that's when you're getting more of what we call the slow wave sleep, and that has much more immune enhancing benefits than the type of sleep that you get following midnight hours. So early to bed, try and get as many hours in before midnight. Winter makes it a little bit easier, doesn't it? Because the sun goes down a lot sooner. Okay, sunlight plays a vital role. Why do I say that? Because of vitamin D. Far more powerful than vitamin C at stimulating the immune system. Vitamin D is amazing. It prevents respiratory tract infections, reduces antibiotic use. It enhances the immune response to a variety of infections. Interestingly, I read about 96% of the patients who went to ICU with COVID were vitamin D deficient. And that's compared to only about 40% of the population. So clearly had a big role to play even with COVID infections. Now, the best way to get vitamin D would be sunlight. So the question then you're probably asking, how much sunlight do I get? Now you probably noticed I'm a little bit red because I went and did some work on the farm the other day and got a little too much sunlight. I have very white skin, so 5 minutes of sun is more than sufficient for me. But there is an equation that you can use depending on your skin type. And it's the quarter of the time it would take for you to get sunburnt. So for me, I get sunburnt within 15 minutes of going into the sun. So I don't need any more than 3, 4, 5 minutes in the sun every day to get enough vitamin D. My daughter, however, who's got very brown, lovely, beautiful Portuguese olive skin, well, she'd probably take about 2 hours to get burnt. Even then, she probably wouldn't get burnt. She'd probably still just go brown. But for her, getting a decent half an hour a day is what she needs to get her adequate vitamin D. Now, I will say, obviously, avoid the middle of the day, particularly in the summer months. We don't want to get skin cancers because of overexposure. But we have become a little too sun conscious in this country and are getting loads of vitamin D deficiency problems. So I would just say, work out what your burn time is and divide it by 4, and then you'll get a nice figure around for yourself. Now, if you live below the latitude of Sydney, Sydney's kind of the cutoff, then you're not going to get adequate vitamin D in winter. So it is helpful if you obviously live south of Sydney to actually get some vitamin D supplementation. If you're not sure how your vitamin D levels are going, it's actually a really simple blood test. You can get that from your GP, and then you can work out whether or not you need to supplement. But certainly is a really important one to have through the winter months. The other thing I might say is sunlight's a great sterilizer. So open your houses to the sunlight as well. Make sure you get plenty of sun inside your house. Sterilise those surfaces that have got bugs on them. It's a fantastic way to sterilise things. So there's your formula. Ventilation. What can we say about that? So, as you increase your air exchange through ventilation, the infection rate and severity across individuals will decrease. In the 1918 influenza pandemic, I believe it was in the Boston area, they had to set up a tent hospital because the hospital itself was overcrowded and full. There was just no room left. They had lots of accidental ventilation in a tent for obvious reasons. Nothing was quite sealed as it should. Interestingly, they had much better outcomes in treating influenza. Even though they were using all the same methods, just the ventilation alone was enough to improve their survival rate. So definitely open up your houses, get those breezes blowing through them. You don't have to sit in the draft. When you're not in the room though, get those windows open. So the other way that I will suggest getting good ventilation is kind of signified in that picture there, is breathing through your nose. It's much better at humidifying the air as it's going into your lungs, and viruses don't like the humidity. So as much as possible, use your nose for breathing and not mouth. This one became particularly important in the last few years, didn't it? Good hygiene. So despite the fact that many viruses and infectious disease are spread by air, about 80% are actually transmitted by touch, okay? So even though we're all wearing masks to protect ourselves from coughing, which is fine, it was actually touch that's the biggest issue. So what do you want to do? Avoid touching the areas where the viruses get in, of course. So particularly around the nose, eyes and mouth, and particularly so in public places. And always remember to sanitize your hand regularly and the surfaces that you have contact with as well. A solution of somewhere between 60 and 80% alcohol should be enough to kill all those infectious diseases. Now, this is a whole talk in itself, and I do have one, but I won't be doing that one today. But there's huge links between stress and immune function, and obviously any excessive or prolonged stress will severely impair your immunity. And I have to say I was a good example of that a few weeks ago. I was seeing over 50 patients a day, and of course lots of infectious disease comes through my door. It's a bit of an occupational hazard. For the first time in 3 years I came down with the virus. Thus the croaky, scratchy voice when I'm talking today. But stress is definitely a big one. Doesn't matter how well you do with your exercise, how well you do with your diet. If you're under a lot of stress, you will depress your immune system. So definitely treat the stress. If you need to talk to someone, get professional help. And there's a few lifestyle measures that you can do as well there, but I won't go into that today. Now this is a really lovely area that we can do a lot in our own homes to help boost our immune system, and that's hydrotherapy. Not the kind of hydrotherapy we see today where people are walking in pools, it's completely different. We're talking about using temperature of water to boost our immune system. So the research has shown that even healthy individuals taking a thermal bath, so this is a bath between about 38 and 39.5 degrees Celsius. Now that doesn't sound very warm, but your skin temperature is just above 30, so it does feel a lot warmer than you would think. But it stimulates a variety of immune factors quite significantly. Interestingly, if it's followed by a short cold exposure, it has a much greater effect. It goes even further with its immune stimulation. So what's something you can do at home? It's a very simple thing that you can do. Start doing this in summer, so by the time winter comes around you can tolerate this. And that's a contrast shower. What we're talking here is basically you start with 5 minutes or 3 minutes if you prefer of the hot, as hot as you can make it obviously without burning yourself, and then 1 minute cold. 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, always finishing on the cold setting. Okay, very simple, and you can just do that just a few times a week. It doesn't have to be every day, but the important thing is that contrast. You want as hot as you can tolerate it and as cold as you can tolerate it. Now, if you're particularly frail, particularly if you have any heart rhythm issues or a weak heart, this is not for you. I would suggest using a foot bath instead. So basically having 2 buckets of water, one obviously that hot temperature, so around about 38 degrees, and then having an ice bucket beside it. And basically you do the same thing, but sitting and just using your feet to do the job for you. It does do a similar job, obviously not quite as good as using your whole body, but it's a fantastic way to do it. And who can forget an Epsom salt bath? Very basic, one that we've long lost, I don't know why, but even when I was growing up, Epsom salts were always a part of our household. But these days, most people look at me very strangely when I suggest it. But Epsom salts is magnesium. It's a beautiful way to get magnesium through the skin quite quickly. So, particularly if you're getting a cold or a flu, get one of those thermal baths happening, put your Epsom salts in it. It will help to relax those muscles and take away some of those aches and pains. So a fantastic thing to do in your regime to help with these things. You can put as much or as little as you want. I essentially usually would put in, so I have a box I think is about 500 grams, I put about 250 per bath. But it depends on the size of your bath too. So you can't overdose on it though. Put as much as you want in there. Yeah. Okay, always my favourite part. How's everyone going, by the way? Am I putting you to sleep? Okay, good. All right, because this stuff gets a bit tricky at times. Okay, let's have a look at some herbs that we can use to help. Now, I do have a whole talk, like I said, that I've prepared on herbs, which takes some of these in more detail, but we'll go through some of the herbs specifically for immunity here. Astragalus and ginseng, I put those up at the top of the list. They're both what we call deep immune stimulators. They don't work quickly, they work over a long period of time, and they're not so much for when you get a cold or a flu, but they're more as a preventer. So if you're somebody who's very prone to getting colds and flus and all the viruses going around, both of those herbs are wonderful to include in your regime. So they do stimulate a variety of immune factors, your T lymphocytes, your macrophages, B lymphocytes, natural killer cells. All these things are increased by using both those herbs. Andrographis, now this is a very strong bitter herb. Not everyone can tolerate this one if you're having it that's not in a capsule form but rather in a tea or something like that. Very, very strong antiviral activity against influenza, hepatitis, cold sores, wart viruses, HIV, and even SARS-CoV-2, obviously, COVID-19. So that's a really good one. They've shown some very good research behind that. And who can forget the elderberry? It used to be a cordial that all the grandmothers used to make for winter. But it does, in fact, it's not the berry, by the way, it's the flowers that are doing the job here. You don't want to take the berries. You wouldn't be very thankful for that on the gut. But it has been shown to directly inhibit the virus from replicating in the immune system. So it really does enhance the efficiency of your immune response to the virus. Now, echinacea has been studied for a long time through Europe, very famous one over there. Lots and lots of research to support the immune-enhancing actions of this herb. Now, it's really good in the acute setting. So whereas the other ones are more about the long-term setting, this one is in the acute setting. So if you're starting to get a cold or a flu, echinacea is another wonderful one to have in your cupboard. And garlic. What can I say about garlic? Very powerful. It can work against viruses, work against bacteria, fungus, protozoans, parasites, bacteria of all kinds. It's got a huge range of activity. Now, I will just say though, cooking it and chopping it all up does tend to reduce its potency. So if you're getting a cold or a flu and you can tolerate it, chew a piece of garlic, just a clove a day. But you can take it dried as well. You'll get pretty good effects from that too. Now, I've put this one up there. I've never used this in the setting of viruses outside of a couple of specific events, but it's very effective against what we call encapsulated viruses, which coronavirus and influenza are both one of those. The reason that I don't use this one as often is because it does react to a lot of medications, so you have to be very cautious, make sure that if you do decide to take it, you've spoken to someone who has the knowledge and says, yep, that's okay with what you're taking. Thyme, very good old culinary favourite. We can all grow thyme. It's not hard at all. But the fun fact is it contains 20 different antiviral compounds in it. Okay, so it's a beautiful one to have in your cabinet or to grow in your garden, and you can throw that into all your dishes. Can't overdose on that one. The other wonderful things about thyme is it's great as an anti-cough remedy. Okay, you can have that either as a tea or something of that nature, or a gargle. Make it up as a tea and cool it down and gargle it. But thyme is fantastic for coughs as well. So if you've got a virus that's really set off a cough, include some thyme. Now, curcumin, the active form of it is actually thuracumin, which I've put on the screen there. Reduces the risk of infection from viruses, but it also contains lots of other anti-inflammatory benefits as well. It's a little bit of a natural blood thinner, which provides some benefit for clotting risks as well. Now, just be careful when you're buying curcumin supplements. Often they are put with adjuvant agents that help to absorb it, and that might include things such as black pepper, which can really irritate the stomach. Even curcumin alone, because it is a spice, not everybody can tolerate it. It does irritate their stomach as well. So just have a look at the form of it. Sometimes, like I said, they put things with it that are probably not the best for your system. The activated form, the thuracumin, on its own is highly absorbable. You don't need to have other substances put with it. Now, I've put dandelion leaf on there in the context of COVID because there was some research that they did early in the piece, and they looked at the leaf there, and an extract was able to block that interaction between that ACE receptor that I talked about earlier and the virus by about, it was over 90%. But it wasn't a test tube setting, it wasn't tested in real life, but still, it wouldn't hurt to include that on your list if you want to help protect against the COVID-19 virus. And the last one is the nigella seeds. That showed some really good promising effects, particularly with COVID-19. It did help with the inflammatory reaction in the lungs as well, so it was a nice one to include there. Now, as a physician, I'd be pretty remiss if I didn't tell you about the spiritual side of your health and the importance of not neglecting it. Spirituality, obviously God is our greatest of all physicians. Anything that we do is just at his hands. So there's nothing in our physiology that he doesn't already understand. But having an active spiritual life has actually been shown to boost your immune system. So not just the occasional reading or the occasional attendance at church, but actually being actively involved has immune boosting benefits. So here's my prescription for your spirituality. Read the Bible, at least an hour a day is best if you can, and obviously pray with your Maker. Very simple lessons to help with your immune system and spirituality there. Now, I've included this slide here mainly because on a lot of talks that I do, I often get people who are struggling with long COVID. So these are people who've had the COVID virus but are having symptoms that are going beyond a month, 2 months, 3 months, etc. So this is actually a program that was put together by the World Council of Health. And this is an organisation that arose to put together as much information as they could without sort of being influenced by other companies and things like that. It's a team of international doctors and scientists and some holistic health practitioners as well. But these are basically the top spike protein detox things that you can do to help. Now, not all of these are available in Australia. You'll see why in a minute. But I'll go through these a little bit one by one. The first one's vitamin D as a supplement, and they're talking about 5,000 international units each day. Vitamin C, about 6 to 12 grams. Now, that's a lot. I don't know if you've ever seen the tablets. They usually come in about a 500 milligram tablet, so we're talking about 12 to 24 of those a day. Most people who get up to about 6 grams will start to get diarrhea. If you do this detox program with vitamin C, my advice is take your vitamin C just to the point before you get the diarrhea and don't go any higher than that. NAC, we did talk about that before, about 600 milligrams twice a day. Again, I just remind you, if you've got a lot of allergies or you have issues with stomach ulcers, don't take that one. Ivermectin, very controversial. The recommendation is to use this about weekly for 4 weeks, and that's about 4 milligrams, 0.4 milligrams, per kilo weekly for 4 weeks. Very hard to get. Good luck trying to find that one here in Australia. The nigella seed, we did talk about this before as well briefly, usually in the form of a seed oil. And the dose is about 500 milligrams of the oil twice a day. Quercetin, again, 500 milligrams a day. Zinc, only up to that 40 milligrams a day maximum. And magnesium, up to about 350 milligrams a day. The curcumin, just remember thoracumin as the activated form. Follow the directions as per the packaging. Everyone's slightly a bit different on that one. And milk thistle extract, 200 milligrams 3 times a day. So that's your detox regime. That's what they have found worked with helping with natural supplements. And obviously one medication there being the ivermectin. If you want more details on that, please come and talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to share that with you. So, practical preparation time. So this is the final part. We've looked at all the things we can do to boost our immune system, but there's some other aspects of what we can do. Obviously, getting ready or just making sure we're prepared for anything that might be an outbreak. Some things to stock at home. The recommendation is about 2 to 3 weeks supply of the over-the-counter simple remedies, and of course your non-perishable items. And look, there's lots of different people out there who've put together things online of what you need for preparedness. You can look all those up, but I'm just going to share some of the natural remedies that you can, stock your cabinet with. So this is your first aid, natural first aid. Get yourself some hydrolyte. So hydrolyte is just basically a simple way of getting all of the minerals that you might lose if you get something like gastro or you sweat a lot through a virus. Having some hydrolyte there will just help to replenish some of those minerals that you might lose. By the way, you can get them as a dissolvable tablet. You can get them as ice blocks that you can freeze, especially for the young children. There's lots of ways you can get that. Vitamin C, I always have some on hand when we first get a cold or a flu. I do the high dosing to just before I get the diarrhea part. Zinc, I do include, I've got a 20 milligram tablet and I've got a 50 milligram. Depending on how bad we are, we might push that up to the 200 milligrams for a few days. Garlic, always good to have on hand, okay? How easy is it to chew a piece of garlic? You're not going to go out anywhere anyway. Have a spare room and you can have it all to yourself for the next few days while you chew away garlic. Thyme, grow that in your garden. It's the easiest thing. It's a weed. You hardly have to do anything with it. It will just keep growing, okay? And then every time you cook that week, just throw piles of thyme into your dishes, whether it's soups or stews or veggies. Throw your thyme in, get lots of that thyme happening for you. If you have a bad cough, throw a bunch of thyme in a cup, pour some boiling water over it, leave it for 15 minutes, let it cool down and gargle it or even drink it if you want. You can use it both that way. Echinacea, we talked about that earlier, really good ones, obviously to help boost your immunity very quickly. and the elderberry as well. Both of those will help with those viruses. White willow bark, we haven't spoken about this, but it's a really good one to have for all the aches and pains, and also for fever if it's getting too high. But never use this one in children, okay? Children do not do well with white willow bark. It has a salicylate in it similar to aspirin, and they can get a syndrome that's quite dangerous. So this one's for adults only, your white willow bark. It is like having an aspirin or a Nurofen on board. In fact, we used to derive aspirin from this particular herb. So white willow bark's a great one to have. And it also, by the way, those who've got salicylate allergies can't have this particular herb. But I've always enjoyed this herb. We use it for lots of different reasons, and in my next talk, I will be discussing that a bit further. Marshmallow root, and I'll actually say or slippery elm powder. Marshmallow root and slippery elm are very similar, but it's a great soother if you've ever had a gastroenteritis virus. So when you've kind of got over the worst of it, having a bit of slippery elm will just soothe the gut as it's healing. And eucalyptus essential oil. Really easy to have that one on hand. So just basically you can do that in a diffuser. If you don't have a diffuser, just put a few drops on a rag and put that beside your bed. There's lots of ways you can use that. You can even make a rub out of it. So all you need is a tablespoon of olive oil or whatever oil you use. A couple of drops of eucalyptus oil, rub it on your chest, on your back, your feet, wherever you like. That's a really good one to have. And it's also a fantastic antiseptic. You want to make a nice antiseptic for your house, eucalyptus is great. And of course your Epsom salts for your bath. Okay, so there's my simple natural remedy chest there. And of course you can always add in there the things that you might use, a bit of paracetamol or anything else that you might use to help through your colds and flus. So here's my summary. Let's try and remember all that I said. Exercise, half an hour a day, something that makes you huff and puff. Adopt that whole food plant-based diet as much as possible for those beautiful immune-boosting antioxidants. Manage that weight, just watch it carefully. Drink plenty of water, 8 glasses a day at least. Get a really good night's rest. Try to get to bed as early as possible. Get your daily dose of sunlight. A quarter of the time it would take you to get sunburnt. Keep your home and house well ventilated, home and workplace well ventilated. Practice your good hygiene, especially in public venues. Manage your stress. Include those hydrotherapy contrast showers and baths. Get your herbs ready, your garlic and your thyme, your elderberry and your echinacea. Always foster your spirituality, include God in your health plan. And make those practical preparations. Prepare now so you don't have to worry about it. You can put these things in your cabinet for whenever you need it. Thank you very much. Now, what's the time? I've got a few minutes for questions. Any questions? Anything that's burning away in your heads that you would like me to answer? Have I just kind of stunned you all for a minute, have I? Yeah, the foot bath is fantastic. Absolutely. And remember too, that the hydrotherapy, there was a really great benefit from having the hot anyway. The cold just enhanced it. So us having our hot showers every day just helps to keep our immune system boosted. But yes, using the foot bath is a fantastic way if you don't tolerate the cold shower, for sure. Yeah.
And you can start for just the cold, you might only put your hand in it or
You can work your way up, absolutely. That's why I said start in summer. It's a lot easier because you can do the cold a lot more easily when you're hot. So, yeah. Yes?
How much potential does the garlic lose when you actually cook with it rather than eat it raw?
The garlic, look, it's a bit of an unknown factor. It definitely does lose a lot of its potency. The potency is lost pretty much upon chopping it. So there's a lot of aromatic compounds within garlic that are very effective on the immune system. And as soon as you cut it, they're being released in the air. And you can smell it, can't you? You can smell the garlic as it's coming. Yeah. That's right. So that's why the recommend is that just pop it straight in your mouth and eat it. The other way is dried, because they dry it at a very low heat. So they keep it below 65 degrees so they don't damage those compounds in them. So dried garlic is another fantastic way of getting more potent garlic. But yes, probably at least half, if not 3/4 of the potency is lost. But then again, if you're making a really strong garlic soup and you've got multiple cloves, you're still going to get lots of benefits there.
What about when you make the garlic powder really strong to put on your garlic bread?
Go for it.
Excuse me, what do you use instead of magnesium? Because I have joint pain in my knees, but I can't take it. It increases my joint pain like you would not believe.
Okay.
I'm allergic to it.
White willow bark. Yeah, it's fantastic. That's actually part of my next talk if you guys are up for it. I'll be looking at arthritis and things like that, what we can do to help. Yes?
You say you have 8 glasses of water. What's that in litres? Because some glasses are big.
Yeah, sure. If you want to actually much better option than just the 8 glasses, that's just what they talk about in the research, but there's actually a bit of a formula to it, and it's 30 mils per kilo of body weight, lean body weight. So what your ideal body weight is, 30 mils per kilo when you're at rest, or 40 mils per kilo if you're having a much more active lifestyle. So for instance, if you're a 70 kilogram person, that'd be 2.1 litres. Okay, and you can push that up obviously a little bit higher if you're, out in the sun or doing some hot work. So at least 2 litres for most people is adequate, but there may be circumstances, and particularly when you're unwell and you're losing a lot of fluid, you will have to increase that as well. Yeah.
What's the formula again?
30 mils per kilo. Yeah, of body weight.
With the water thing, I don't ever get thirsty. I can go for 2-3 days and I not even miss a glass of water. Is there anything wrong? What's causing that? Why don't I get thirsty? I want to drink it, but...
Yeah, so we actually naturally have, if we suppress the thirst response long enough, our body switches into an appetite response. So we actually switch on our appetite more because it's trying to get you to eat something that might have a bit of fluid in it. But people who've suppressed their thirst for a long period of time will no longer feel thirsty. It's actually just a normal human physiology effect. The way to get around that is to basically retrain, but that can take months to get it back into that thirst mechanism. So for people who are like that, sometimes it's an aversion to just the lack of taste or the palatability of water. And you know what? There's other ways of getting fluid too. So all your soups have fluid in it. Having teas that are not caffeinated are fantastic sort of fluid. So there's ways to get around that. You can flavour your water, throw in some lemon, some peppermint, some spearmint, all those sorts of things. So I don't necessarily have to say it's pure water that you need, or it's ideal, but you can flavour that with healthy option. Yeah, well, we're talking 97% water, so great source of fluid. And, yeah.
2 litres of water on top of that fluid, is that an old wives' tale? Okay.
Unless that fluid's very salty or caffeinated. Any caffeinated beverage, you can add an extra glass of water to what you'll need once you've had that caffeinated beverage. Yeah. Okay. So how are you all feeling? Keep going? Okay, well, how about you guys have a 5-minute break, go get some water. I'm going to have a drink. Go get some water, have a toilet break, stretch your legs, shake your brain around so you can wake up, and we'll come back and we'll do a quick herb course. Okay, are we all ready to go on a whirlwind tour through the world of herbs? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background first, and then we'll kind of just take you on that tour. Now, we've all heard about holistic medicine, have we? There's 1,000 different people with different ideas about what holistic medicine is. And there is a good reason for that, is because often we forget different aspects of health. So I actually put together this little pyramid of sorts a few years ago to try and make sense of what this all meant and where everything fitted. And there's a very old saying that's first the word, then the herb, and then the knife. So this was prior to modern medicine. But essentially, It's correct. First you learn about your health, then you treat it naturally and resort to those things if we need to down the line. Sometimes we need emergency stuff first. If you're in a car crash, I'm not going to offer you white willow bark herb to help you with your aches and pains. So, we have to be sensible. Pharmaceuticals have their place. Surgery has its place. But it shouldn't be necessarily the first thing we resort to treat simple things or, chronic diseases that are developing. So that's this pyramid. So you can see on the bottom, we got the health education, which is what I'm doing for you today and what I do a lot of. Then after that, we've got the lifestyle measures that you put in place. So they're all the things that you can do for yourself, a healthy lifestyle. After that, we get into the non-pharmaceutical, non-surgical, so more natural treatments. Now, I've included lots of things in there. So it could be physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, psychological therapy. It also includes herbs and simple remedies, into that particular category. Then we jump up and obviously we get to the pharmaceuticals, which I said have their place. I have to use them in situations and I'm quite happy to when I know what I'm doing with them, of course. And then finally the surgery. We sometimes do need that knife to save lives. So we can do the vast majority with our health though in those bottom 3 layers, can't we? Most of what we do for our health sits in those categories. So today I'm just going to focus on that middle category, of course, and that's in herbal medicines. So let's go back in history a little bit first. The use of plants to treat human illness is obviously as old as time itself. Right from the beginning, we were using herbs, so there's nothing new. It's a very long history. So herbs were always used as part of the diet and healing, and even in the Bible times. Even the book of Revelation describes, a holy city where we'll be eating the leaves and, of course, the fruit from the tree for healing of the nations. In the East, obviously, we've got traditional Chinese medicine, which uses a lot of herbs, and the Indian Ayurvedic as well. Now, I don't subscribe to either of those systems per se in how they treat medical illnesses because there's a lot of spiritualism there. So I tend to use herbs as I would use medications. I look at what works, what's the science behind them, and how they interact with our bodies, rather than how they would interact with some sort of universal life force or something else that is not part of my belief system. So, depending on what you read, however, up to about probably 70, if not 80% of what we use as our modern pharmaceuticals are actually derived from plants. So we've got to remember that herbs still are active in their constituents. And sometimes, like I said, what we derive from them make up some great pharmaceuticals, which we are using in a whole variety of manners. So currently, we're thinking probably at least most of the developing world still use herbs rather than pharmaceuticals as well. And, obviously it's becoming more and more popular in Western society. In our current community, in the Western world, there's a number of reasons why they've become particularly popular. The belief that it will promote healthier living, the improvement in effectiveness, quality and safety of the plant medicines which we're using, particularly with needing to have strict guidelines on how they're produced in places like Australia. Obviously dissatisfaction with the conventional medicines and what we have to offer. Some of them obviously have produced very strong effects, more than over above of what they expected for people. And of course, people are looking more and more to see what they can do for themselves, how they can manage their own illnesses. So that's why they have become a lot more popular. In Australia, we spend about $5 billion a year on complementary medicines, which is about 40% of that is actually on herbs as well. So a big portion of our expenditure is on herbs. So why do we use herbs? Herbal medicine really does a few things that's over and above some of the other options. So it focuses on the whole herb and what it can harness rather than just the extracted components. And there's a few exceptions to that rule, but generally we use the whole herb. They can be used in lower doses when compared to using extracted isolates to obtain a therapeutic benefit. The variety of herbs lots of herbs actually demonstrate a greater activity than what we would normally assume from the constituents. So clearly there's an interaction between the different things within the herb to produce the benefit. An example is actually that white willow bark that I was talking about. So if you extract the salicylic acid out of it and make aspirin, does anyone know what happens if you take aspirin long term, what it does to your tummy? Yeah, it can cause quite a bit of gastritis in susceptible people. You get quite a lot of inflammation there. Interestingly, taking it in the form of the herb, either as meadowsweet, which is another one, or white willow bark, you don't get that effect. In fact, meadowsweet actually protects the stomach. So it's not what you would expect, because there's other components within herbs that provide protection against potential adverse reaction if you'd extracted that out. So that's the beauty of using herbs in that particular context. So that's another benefit, but another thing I find with herbs is often there's a multiplicity of benefits from one herb, and you'll see that through my talk as well, where a herb will appear in a couple of different settings and used for different things. Herbs are particularly good at treating very simple things, and also a lot of the chronic disorders that are not completely severe and sort of, out of control. So things such as very mild hypertension, any sort of sugar and fat imbalances, eczema, psoriasis, arthritis, hormonal issues, they respond quite well to herbs. All of the functional gut problems, so things such as irritable bowel syndrome, respond really beautifully to herbs as well. Fatigue, stress, mild mental health problems are great as well. And of course, immune system support, which we saw from our previous talk. Now, I'm just going to go through 3 different types of herbs. Obviously, there's a little bit of overlapping towards these, but it's important that you know them, because if you're going to use herbs, you have to know where the line is drawn. So the first one is the powerful herbs, very powerful and instant actions. They can be very toxic and dangerous to use. Generally, we don't even use these in herbal medicine at all, and they are usually on the poison schedule. So in this country, we have one of those that prevents us anyway. And these herbs are really only ever used by doctors in particular settings. Does anybody know what those plants are there? Foxglove's one of them, yeah. So that's where we derive digitalis or digoxin that we use to treat heart arrhythmias. So that's one of the plants. There's a belladonna plant there. That's where we derive atropine, one of the pharmaceuticals that we use in anaesthetics and cardiac arrhythmias and things like that. And of course, the hemlock, which is the old poison that some of the old people from many thousands of years ago used to take to kill themselves. We don't use that at all. So yeah, these are very poisonous plants. You certainly wouldn't want to use them. In the old days, herbalists did occasionally extract some from these plants and use them for all sorts of weird and wonderful things, but certainly not safe. So avoid these. So these are the mid-range herbs. These are the herbs that lie somewhere between the powerful and the gentle herbs. And they are defined quite regularly with their chemistry. We know what's in them. Some are prescription only, but some are still used by herbalists. They do need to be very cautious because they do interact with medications and they do have potential safety issues. And some of them, like I said, are on the poison schedule and some are not. If inappropriately used or abused, they can be very toxic. Does anyone want to know what those 2 plants are? The top one's licorice. I know lots of people think that's a safe one, but there are potential reactions with that one. And the other one is St. John's wort. So licorice I haven't included in this talk, obviously, because it's a strong herb. I'm only presenting the simple ones. Licorice is great to treat stomach ulcers and a few other things in the gut. However, it does cause a raise in your blood pressure. It does cause fluid retention. There is potential interaction, particularly if you've got issues in those areas. So you would only use it in a very cautious manner, obviously with strict supervision. St. John's wort, it's mainly an issue because of all the interactions with medications. So if you're not taking any other medication, it's a relatively safe medication or safe herb to take. But again, you have to make sure you get the dosing right, and of course, you do it under strict supervision. Okay, now these are the gentle herbs. These are the ones that we can use pretty safely. There's very little reaction with these with anything else. They can be used together. They can be used with most medications. There is a few exceptions there, and I'll be presenting that in my talk, some of the cautions that we have with some of these. They tend to have quite complex chemistry, in that it's often hard to determine which particular constituent is having their actions and benefits, but that's okay. They're very simple and non-toxic. They will be much slower to work, whereas the powerful herbs work almost instantaneously. These take a while. Now, normally when I'm treating somebody with herbs, I usually tell them to give it a good 3 months, okay? By about 6 weeks, you should start to see some benefits, but following that, a good 3 months to know whether or not you're going to get the benefits from it. So these are slow, these are gentle. You've got to keep that in mind. These are not quick things, they're not like pharmaceuticals. But bear in mind, even the medications that we use to treat mental illness, particularly for depression and anxiety, they take up to 6 weeks to take effect anyway. So it's not alone in the slowness of that. So there's three herbs there you probably recognise: echinacea, peppermint and chamomile. Beautiful herbs to use. So how do we use herbs? We would all know those ones, wouldn't you? You can use them fresh or dried. Those are the ones that are just regular part of your diet, cooking, salads, etc. We can use it in a tea form, and I'm going to teach you how to make a herbal medicinal tea today. So that's infusions or decoctions, and I'll explain what they are in the next couple of slides. Liquid extracts, so this is what herbalists who are, practiced and trained, they tend to use these liquid extracts, which are very convenient form of preserving the herbs, usually in some sort of alcohol or glycerol. Shelf life of several years, very stable, and it's the chief form of prescription by all the herbalists around the world. I often will formulate extracts with 2 or 3 different, maybe up to 5 different herbs in it for particular conditions, so they work really well. When they actually produce them, they're under strict guidelines on terms of how they're made and their concentration, so it's all very standardised. Tinctures, generally not available to the general public except for a few minor ones. These are also prepared usually with alcohol or alcohol and water, but they're usually a lot weaker. So they're usually sort of 1 in 5 versus 1-to-1 type scenario. So they're not as strong as the liquid extracts, but they still have a long shelf life. So there's also extracted components. So earlier in the talk I said the vast majority of herbs, they use the whole, but there are some that are not safe to use so. So ginkgo biloba is usually used as an extract. It's not healthy to usually take the whole leaf form of that. Essential oils, so we've seen a lot of those. They've kind of had a big rise to fame recently, all the essential oil companies and aromatherapy. I will caution you though, essential oils are highly, highly concentrated. So like 1 drop of peppermint oil is like having 25 cups of tea. So we're talking very, very strong, very concentrated ingredients. There is sort of a bit of a push for ingested oils out there, but that again is very potentially dangerous and toxic. For example, just 1 ml of thyme oil, that's thyme oil, is toxic, fatal. So, people are kind of pushing these things, but if they don't know what they're talking about, they're advising some very dangerous options here. You can use these topically though, most of the time they're quite safe, but you have to dilute them down to about 3%. So anything over about 5% from the vast majority of oil is very toxic for your skin. So be careful with those ones. Tablets, very convenient form. They often dry the herb, put it into a tablet form, very easily transportable, and much more easy for the public to use and to get hold of than the liquid extracts, of course. And finally, but not least importantly, are your topical formulations. So I do some ointments and balms and things with herbs in them to use topically for a variety of things, from eczema to psoriasis to arthritis, those sorts of things. So just a little bit about safety. So like I said, even though herbs are natural, they still contain sometimes quite potent active ingredients. So we do need to treat them with caution. And obviously, I said the mid-range ones will potentially interact with other medications and can have side effects if they're used or prepared incorrectly. So, here's some rules if you decide to use them. Use only the gentle herbs. Try not to get into the stronger ones. Do a little bit of training and research. There are some simple little courses out there that you can do. You don't have to be a professional or a doctor or a nurse or those sorts of things to do it. There are some reasonable ones out there. If you're not sure, ask a herbalist like me, I'll be able to share. And always avoid treating these categories. Even I, outside of a few exceptions, do not treat young children, pregnant or breastfeeding women. So, like I said, there's a few exceptions. There's a few herbs that we do use in pregnancy. but I certainly don't treat babies or very young children. I also avoid treating people who've got lots of complex medical conditions and complex medication regimes. Even though I may have the knowledge, putting all those things together, they have enough interactions with the medications they're on to throw in some herbs could just make things a whole lot worse for them. So they're the categories of people that I avoid treating, and we should all avoid treating if we're going to use herbs. All right. 2 different types of teas with making a medicinal herbal tea, and that's because there's two types of herbs that we use. A herbal decoction is the first one, and this is using the hard parts of the plant. So your roots and your barks, potentially some of the berries that have been dried are quite hard as well. And so here's how you make that one. You take your ingredients, you get your finely chopped or divided botanical, you get some distilled or purified water. I just use a jug with some, it's got a charcoal filter, I just use that as well. And basically, the method here is that you actually boil the herb. Okay, so you put the herb and the water in the pot and you boil it away. 15 minutes, half an hour, depending on how quick your stove is. And then you just strain it through a tea strainer and take it in divided doses throughout the day. And I'll be giving you dosages of different herbs later on for different things. Now, teas don't store well. You do have to use them within that day. They don't last till the next day. But yes, this is just for the hard parts of the plant. And then you obviously boil it down until you actually have a nice coloured solution, strain it off and drink it throughout the day. Then there's a herbal infusion. This is a different kind of tea, and this is for the soft parts of your plant. So these are the flowers, the leaves, the very gentle parts. Now you can also use the powdered parts of the hard. So if you've got a powdered bark or powdered root or something of that nature, you would treat it as you would an infusion. So this is different in that you take your ingredients, and then you boil the water and pour it over the top. So you don't actually boil the root away, you don't actually boil the herb away with this one. You pour the boiling water over the herb and then let that sit for 15 minutes before you drink it. Okay, so you see the difference? The hard stuff, you need to boil it down to get the active ingredients out of it. The soft stuff, you just need to pour the boiling water over it to get the benefit. Okay, so those are 2 different ways of doing it. Same ending though, use it within the day, take in divided doses throughout the day. All right, any questions about that before I move on?
Something like thyme, which is like
The leaf?
vine stem, but like the leaves, I would do that as an infusion, wouldn't I?
Yeah, so the stem doesn't really have the potency, it's the leaves. So you could still leave the things on the stem itself, it doesn't matter, you don't have to peel them off, but you basically just load up the cup with your thyme, pour the boiling water over it, cover it, let it sit for 15 minutes, and then you can come back and drink it. Yeah. All right, we've already done most of these. I'll just quickly go through them just as a little reminder. This is the immunity system. Yeah, astragalus. So that was the deep immune stimulator. Really, it's a major leader for that particular thing. Stimulates your white blood cells, your phagocytes, macrophages, IgE, IgM antibodies, enhances your natural killer cell activities. Really good to help prevention of colds and flus. But it also aids in cancer treatment. So there's some research that shows that where they have added it as an adjuvant to normal treatments of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, etc., it improves the cancer survival time. So all my cancer patients who are open to using herbs, I put them on some astragalus to help them through. And that's your dose there, 2 to 6 grams of dried root daily, okay? Now you can get these in tablet form, in liquid form as well over the counter, but you certainly can buy the herb as a dried root, which can either be powdered or as chunky like that, and you can make your own teas from it. If you're going to measure them out, I would suggest that you get yourself a little pocket weight scale. They are ones that they usually use to measure jewellery and things like that. It's a really easy way to measure small doses like this. When I say 2 to 6 grams daily, normally I get my patients to divide that into 3. So I might get them to do, say, 2 grams 3 times a day. If they're doing the 6 grams, if they want only 3 grams, I'll get them 1 gram 3 times a day. So they make up a cup of tea, they just put that amount in, pour the boiling water over it, and drink it 3 times a day. So you don't have to have all that dose at once, but that's your daily amount. And that's with all the herbs that I'm talking about. So andrographis, we talked about this earlier as well. Very strong bitter herb, deep immune stimulator, gets your natural killer cells going, that phagocyte activity going, lots of lymphocytes. Very, very good antiviral activity against a whole variety of things. We talked about that last time, the influenza, hepatitis, cold sore viruses, HIV, and of course COVID-19. This one, you use the above ground aerial parts, so your stems and leaves. Again, that's your dose of 2 to 6 grams per day. This one you don't use in pregnancy. Okay, it does have some potential effects there, so you avoid that one in pregnancy. Okay, echinacea. Lots and lots of research behind this, remember. Very good for your innate immunity. It's more of a superficial immune stimulator, so one that you use to get a quick response when you've got colds and flus. Particularly influenza is a very good one for this one. It's also very useful for some skin infections. I do use it for people who get boils and folliculitis and things like that. It's very helpful. And there's your dose, 1 to 3 grams of dried root daily. And I don't need to share any cautions with that one, it's very safe. Elderflower, beautiful antiviral. Don't ever use the berries, you'll get lots of nausea and cramps and you will hate me if you think that that's what you need to take. So it is the flower itself. So it directly inhibits virus entry into the immune system and enhances the efficacy of the immune response to virus. So very good in congestion and coughs and colds. If you've got a lot of that mucus happening, it works really well for that. Great throat gargle, wish I had some right now. Really good for pharyngitis, tonsillitis, those sorts of things. And there's your dose, 1 to 3 grams of the dried flowers daily. Garlic, age-old, wonderful healing remedy, antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, antiparasite, you name it, it does it. Interestingly, it won't harm the beneficial bacteria in your gut, even though it kills the bad stuff off, leaves the good stuff behind. So lots of benefits there for your colds, influenza, bronchitis, and nasal congestion. It works beautifully. Anyone who's chewed a clove of garlic will realise that they've just blown their brain apart sometimes with the fumes that go through their head, so very good for nasal congestion. A diet rich in garlic has also got anti-cancer or anti-tumour benefits, so it's also got another effect on the immune system that way. So your dose there is actually 2 to 4 grams of the dried powdered garlic. You can have 2 to 4 fresh cloves a day if you can tolerate it and you live in a socially free environment for a few days. But yeah, the beauty of the dried garlic, like I said before, is when they do make it, they do realise that taking it to high heats actually destroys the benefits, so they usually dry it at a very low heat to ensure you still get those benefits. Your thyme, very much that garden favourite, antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. You can use it even to treat toenail fungus, this one. I've got a nice nail polish that I use to treat fungal infections on the nail. Very useful in respiratory tract infections, colds, flus, bronchitis, any congestion in the respiratory tract. Particularly good for coughs. So this is a nice one to have with all those coughs, like I said before, or as a gargle, or even as a mouthwash if you get gum disease. It's a really nice one to have as well. And your dose there is 2 to 3 grams of dried leaves daily. If you're using fresh, by the way, double the dose. So once you dry it, you tend to lose at least half the moisture quantity, if not more. So if you double, triple, quadruple, you're probably going to get pretty close to the right dose. In the Portuguese culture, they have a special soup, which is a bit like their winter penicillin, isn't it? It's just basically made of huge amounts of thyme and garlic, and it's just sort of the most amazing soup to have through the winter. But obviously using all these properties, all these antiviral, antibacterial properties to help with the winter blues, infectious blues. Oh, and I will remind you, thyme oil, don't use it, fatal poisoning with very small amounts. Never ingest. Okay, let's move on to heart health. Well, there's some fantastic herbs that we can use here. Often don't think about it, but there are some really great ones. I will say though, because some of these are quite good in terms of helping with blood pressure, cholesterol, sugar, all those sorts of things, it is a good idea to monitor this with your GP. So if you are going to take these herbs, let your GP know so they can just watch to make sure they don't need to adjust medications if things are happening. Now, this is a favourite. The gold standard for heart disease is the hawthorn berry. You just don't want to overdose on this one, so please don't go over the dosing that I've advised. So really long tradition as a really good heart tonic, and I will share why. It improves the coronary blood flow through the blood vessels of your heart. It improves the contraction of your heart muscle. It protects your heart muscle from damage, so in things where you have heart attacks, it provides some protection. It actually helps with abnormal rhythms of the heart as well. It lowers the blood pressure and the cholesterol. And there's your dose. 3 grams of the dried leaf, flower or berry daily. The flower is actually the most potent part, but most of the time we use the berry. But there's your dose. Now, because it can interact potentially, particularly if you're on blood pressure medications, those sorts of things, you do need to just, like I said, monitor that if you decide to take it and let your local GP know. They may not know about the berry, but you can share that with them that it can potentially lower your blood pressure. And if you're on medication for your rhythm of your heart, just let them know as well.
What do you do with it, like you mentioned, a leaf.
Yeah, so you can actually purchase the berries and make a tea out of it, or you can actually get it as a supplement. It's quite easy to get over the counter. Yeah.
What do you do with the leaf? Just cut it up and eat it or something?
You make a tea. Make a tea. Yeah. So the tea will just help to extract some of those components for you to get the benefits out of it.
Does it work?
Yeah, really well. That's why I said you need to make sure you let GP know, because this is a fantastic herb. It's been used for hundreds of years, and it's now been researched, and they're the benefits that they've found.
It's all exciting because I told them we've got some of that at home.
Yay!
I'll let you know the results.
Yes, please do. It will be slow to work. Remember I said herbs take a while, but the benefits happen with time. Yeah. Okay. Garlic, it's making an appearance again, and there's a good reason in heart disease. It prevents the build-up of blood fats on those arteries, so that atherosclerosis. It really does help to lower those bad blood fats overall. Provides benefits in lowering blood pressure, and I actually did have a patient who decided to go full hog at garlic, and she was on blood pressure tablets, and she came into my room. Not only did I need to stand 10 metres away, but she was having issues with very low blood pressure. So it does work. It also does thin the blood because it reduces platelet clumping. So do have to be a little bit cautious, particularly if you're going to go into surgery and you're having decent doses of that. The dose there is about 1/2 to 1 gram of the dry garlic daily. So as a long-term measure to get those benefits, that's all you need. Okay, so which is only about a clove at the most to get those sort of benefits. But yeah, 1/2 to 1 gram of the dry garlic a day. So it's not like what you would have in the immune setting where you're just having a big dose to try to kickstart things. This is sort of a daily dose that you would have. And that's what I just reminded you, if you're going into surgery and you've been using that sort of dosing of garlic long term, just let them know so they can take that into account. Now, olive leaf, probably not as strong as some of the others, but certainly does have some benefits at reducing blood pressure in very mild cases. It does also help a little bit with your blood fats, particularly that unhealthy bad cholesterol called LDL. It does increase your insulin sensitivity, which will be a bit helpful for those who've got diabetes. And the dose is about 500 to 1,000 milligrams, or 0.5 to 1 gram per day of your olive leaf extract. No cautions with that one. Now, ginkgo biloba, this is one of those ones where I said you don't use the whole herb, you only use the extract. And it's known particularly for its circulatory benefits. So what do people mostly know ginkgo for?
Memory.
Yeah, memory. The reason is because it's improving the circulation in the brain. So it's very useful for that purpose, and you'll see some benefits in early stages of dementia, vertigo, tinnitus, and improvements after stroke. The vertigo and tinnitus, I will say, it doesn't work for everybody because not everybody's vertigo or tinnitus is caused by a problem with their circulation. there's other reasons that can cause that. But if you're someone who's obviously got that family history or have had that lifestyle where you have circulation and you're getting vertigo and tinnitus, it can actually help with that. So not only does it enhance the blood flow through the brain, it also does the blood vessels in the rest of the body, including your arms and legs. So one of the benefits we get from that is it decreases claudication, which is a blockage of your arteries in your legs. So it's also of use for that. And your dosing in tablet form, don't ever take this as a whole herb, is about 120 to 160 milligrams a day. It depends on the formulation. They are standardised with how much of a particular extract in it. Just follow the guidelines. Now, globe artichoke. What part of the globe artichoke do we normally eat? The heart. So eat the heart and then use the rest as a herb. Okay, it's not the heart that we're using here, it's actually the leaves and the stems or even the root. The flower head is what we use culinarily, and this is what we use medicinally as the rest of the plant. So don't throw out the rest because it's got some beautiful properties to it. It reduces your cholesterol and triglycerides, which is another kind of bad fat. It actually helps to improve your good cholesterol as well. It decreases blood sugar. So those who've got a bit of problem with sugar, might be a bit high or even a diabetic, it will decrease your blood sugar levels. If you are a diabetic and taking insulin, you do have to be careful and just make sure you monitor that. And it's 1 to 3 grams of your dried leaves, stems and root daily. So that's how you would make that. Just one caution, don't use it if you've got gallbladder issues. So it can cause exacerbation of those, so just keep that in mind. Now the bergamot orange, has anyone heard of this one? It's been made famous by a cardiologist here in Sydney actually, but it has been long known to have benefits over in Europe. So what does it do? Well, it reduces the unhealthy fats and cholesterol and increases the good ones. It will improve the circulation in the very small blood vessels of your body. It will lower your blood sugar. And it's also very protective against fatty liver, which we've had a bit of a pandemic of that in this world, especially in Western countries. Now, dosing is not quite as straightforward. It's the juice with a bit of rind in it of one orange, of these oranges per day, extremely bitter. If you do find these oranges, which are very, very hard to get in this country, I've actually bought a bergamot orange tree and I've just started to get my first lot this year. But if you do have it, you have to mix it with other fruits, but there are some supplement forms out there and some very good ones. So it's probably much easier to get that one in supplement form and just follow the directions of the producer of that. Now, who doesn't have gut problems? So I think we could all benefit from these ones. Very common problem in our society, and there's loads of herbs. I've only just chosen my favourite ones, but there are so many that help. And look, across all cultures, they all have their particular herbs in different areas of the world, but there's loads of them that help the gut. I think God just put these ones in nature because he knew. All right, peppermint is the big leader of the pack. It treats a whole variety of gut complaints, wonderful calming effect on the gut, helping to relieve lots of colic, any sort of dyspepsia, wind, bloating, nausea, cramps, you name it, it works really, really well. It does improve the digestive process. So, sort of an hour after a meal, if you're feeling really sluggish, a cup of peppermint tea will do you the world of good. Really good option for those with irritable bowel syndrome, a very functional problem of the gut. Fantastic for that. And the dose is about 3 grams of the dried leaves daily. No interactions there. You can have them very safely. I will say though, if you're using peppermint tea that's manufactured by a lot of the varieties that you might get at, say, Woolworths and Coles, just be careful. Do try to get organic varieties. A lot of these teas are irradiated and treated before they go to market. So you're best off actually buying them from people who actually sell herbs online, who have sources that aren't adulterated, basically. So I can certainly share some good examples of that in private. I don't want to advertise from the top. But if you want to know where you can get some good quality herbs, just come and speak to me afterwards. Right next to that is the chamomile. Very, very similar in its benefits. Treats that colic, that wind, bloating, nausea and cramps. But this one finds its benefit mainly in those who have a lot of underlying anxiety associated with their gut symptoms. So that's where its benefit comes over and above the peppermint. So it really does help with, tension headaches, insomnia as well. So it kind of has an added benefit there. Fantastic for irritable bowel syndrome. And again, you use about 3 grams of the dried flowers each day. Normally, if I have someone who has a lot of gut complaints and they are using these herbs, these two, I would normally recommend using peppermint before lunch and chamomile after. So your peppermint is actually more of a stimulant to the mind. It kind of wakes you up and gives you a bit of pep up, whereas you want the calming effect of the chamomile of an evening. So best to have peppermint of a morning, not that you can have peppermint of an evening if you'd like, but if you're using it for this purpose, peppermint of a morning and your chamomile of an evening is a nice way to do that regime. Slippery elm and marshmallow. Now, slippery elm is becoming harder and harder to get. It comes from a tree in the US, the bark of the tree. And unfortunately, it's been, there's fewer and fewer of those trees available to take the bark off. So marshmallow root is becoming a lot more easily accessible, and you can actually just grow that one in your garden. But they have very similar properties, so there's very little difference between the two in terms of their benefits. Now, particularly it works in the upper gut, soothing and sort of coating. If there's any inflammation or ulcers in the gut, it really does help with that. I also tend to use those post-gastroenteritis as well, just to soothe the gut down. It does relieve constipation as well, particularly in the elderly. It's a bit of a strange herb in that if you've got diarrhea, it will help to bind you up. If you've got constipation, it will help to relieve your bowels. So it's a bit of a normalizer in its effect, if you could say that, on either end. Now, to take this, you don't have to have it as a tea. I tend to just use a heaped teaspoon. There's no problem with using this at all, but it's a heaped teaspoon in a room temperature beverage. And you just mix it up really quickly, vigorously, and then you scull it quite quickly, because otherwise it will form a gel and you will have to scoop it out and eat it, which is quite unpleasant and gluggy. There is a potential issue with these if you're taking medication. Theoretically, it may prevent the absorption of some of your medication. It does provide a bit of a coating or a lining to your gut. So if you do take regular medication, my advice is just not to have it 2 hours before the medication. So you can have, any time in that 2 hour prior to the medication. You can certainly take it sort of an hour or so afterwards, but try to leave a bit of time beforehand to get the medication absorbed, and we're all good. Ginger, another favourite. Helps in a lot of digestive complaints as well. It certainly treats the slow digester, someone who doesn't find their stomach empties very well. This will speed things up for them if they're feeling very sluggish in the gut. Lots of good properties for nausea and vomiting, motion sickness, pregnancy-related nausea. And there's your dose, just 1 gram of the dried root daily. Don't overdose on this one. It can be quite irritating when you go too high with this one, so it is quite spicy for the gut. And meadowsweet. Now this one actually has a couple of benefits, but we're just going to look here at the gut. Now this is particularly good if you've got lots of acid in the tummy. So it's very soothing and helping when you've got dyspepsia, that reflux or heartburn, stomach ulcers. That's where this one comes in really well. And there's your dose, 3 grams of dried flowers or the leaves every day. Now, just like the white willow, you do need to avoid this one in children and, of course, those who are sensitive to salicylates. Bay leaf, I put this one in there just for my husband. I don't use a lot of this except in cooking, and that's primarily where you'd use it anyway. But there is some really good research behind this. It does enhance your digestive process, particularly when you're having a lot of protein in that meal. So you'll find a lot of cultures will throw their bay leaves into the cooking where there's a lot of protein, and it does help with that. It does relieve your wind and bloating. So I just say add a few leaves to your soups and stews, particularly where there's going to be a bit of a heavy meal. You don't consume the leaf, you just take the leaf out once the thing has been cooked. Interestingly, the actual oil of the berry is fantastic as a rub for your arthritis as well. Now, dandelion, fantastic for dyspepsia too. When you've got any sort of issues there, loss of appetite, chronic constipation, that's where it comes in. Now, what we're talking about here is a dandelion root, okay, not the leaf. We will come to the leaf another time. It will enhance your liver function, that bile production, so it really does help with that side of things. And there's your dose there, 6 grams of the root, dried root daily. So remember, the root is for the gut. Again, if you've got any sort of blockage in the bile duct or a stricture or something like that, or any sort of major gallbladder inflammation or, of course, bowel obstruction, you wouldn't want to use any herbs then anyway, you'd be in hospital. Now, herbs in the urinary system. What can we do to help there? There's some really good ones here. Who's heard of corn silk? So corn silk, that's the stuff on the corn that you peel off and you throw away. Not the actual leaf pulp, you know, that silky bit, the stringy bit that we hate. That's actually the bit that we need to use. It's actually got quite complex chemistry behind it, but it's very good. Very soothing for the urinary tract in both chronic and acute conditions. So it's a very gentle diuretic. And we use it particularly in urinary tract infections and in kidney stones because it gives just that gentle soothing effect for those. And there's your particular recipe. By the way, it's not the brown stuff that you peel off. Most of this corn silk that we use medicinally is actually from the young corn that has quite green silk. That's the best stuff. We dry that and then we use that. Buku, another one that's very, very good. We use the leaves in this one. So it's a major urinary tract antiseptic. So it does have mild broad-spectrum antibiotic cover for a few bugs, but it's particularly good for E. coli urinary tract infections. So we do tend to use it for the recurrent or chronic infections in particular, of both the bladder as well as the prostate. And there's your dose, about 2 to 3 grams of the leaves every day. Now this one does have a particularly volatile oil, so we don't really want to boil this one. Don't want to put anything too hot on this one. So probably best to use this as a tablet preparation. And we always need to avoid this one in pregnancy. Couch grass. Anyone got couch in their lawn? You're growing medicinal herbs. There you go. There's actually the rhizome again in the plant, the bottom part of that plant. Very complex chemistry again. Very soothing to the urinary tract, just like the other ones. Really calms down those pains and spasms. You can get a little bit of antibiotic activity as well. It's a nice gentle diuretic. It just helps to flush things out for you. Very, very useful in bladder infections. Any sort of cystitis, irritation or inflammation anywhere in the urinary tract, including the prostate. And there's your dose, 6 grams of the rhizome daily. And who can forget the cranberry? Does anybody dislike the taste of cranberry? Yeah, I'm not a fan either. Bilberry and blueberries work just as well, so we're okay. Okay, antibacterial. So how does it work? Its action is interesting. It doesn't attack the bacteria per se, and neither is an acidic complex. It works by preventing the bacteria from sticking to the wall of your bladder and then infecting it. So it stops that process and therefore you don't get the infection. So it prevents urinary tract infections. Interestingly, I find that people who take it whilst they have a urinary tract infection will often make their symptoms worse. And that's because it is quite acidic and it makes the urine more acidic and more painful. So I don't generally use this to treat, but rather to prevent. So it's for those people who get, or particularly women who are getting recurrent urinary tract infections, I put them on cranberry to try and stop that from happening. Now the dose is about 250 ml glass of juice, or the equivalent amount of a supplement. Now most supplements will tell you on there how much they have and how much you need, so it shouldn't be too hard to work that out. And like I said, if you don't like cranberries, blueberries are fantastic as well, doing the same job. Now, back to the dandelion. Now, this time, we're not talking about the root, we're talking about the leaf. And it is a gentle diuretic. It flushes out that urinary system. Very helpful at preventing urinary tract infections. And there's your dose. A lot bigger for this one. 5 to 10 grams of the dried leaves daily. Now, as with the root, you do need to be careful if you have gallbladder inflammation, blocked bile ducts, bowel obstruction. The other one is if you're on strong diuretics, you don't want to add to that. So you wouldn't want to add that one in. And in certain cases of chronic kidney disease, it's not the best thing to be having either. Now this one is for you guys, very special herb, the saw palmetto. Treats prostate enlargement, benign prostate enlargement, particularly in the early stages. So in about 90% of men, so it's quite a large, they gain improvement in their symptoms and signs, including the frequency of urination, the flow rate, the retention, urinating at night, and pain with passing urine. So it's a wonderful herb to have. And there is your dosing, 3 grams of the dried berry pulp daily. Is this popular? It is. All right, let's moving on to the nervous system. So a bit of the mental health side of things. This is my all-time favourite, passion flower. Beautiful vine, love growing it. It's got the most beautiful flowers. I would grow it just for the vine alone. But it is a fantastic herbal remedy for its sedative properties. Lots of anti-anxiety actions in this one. But it's specifically indicated for insomnia and anxiety disorders. So if I had to choose one herb over all the others to help with poor sleep, it would be the passion flower. Particularly if there's lots of restlessness and irritability, that is definitely one. It does actually help a bit with nerve pain as well. For people who've got chronic nerve pain, this is a nice one to add into their regime. And you have about 3 grams of the dried above ground part of the plant daily. Skullcap, another beautiful herb with sedative and calmative reactions to the nervous system. We do use this again in insomnia, but it's also good for depression and anxiety, particularly when there's a lot of fatigue and exhaustion. So those who are really debilitated, have really just gone too long under the pump, Skullcap is a nice additive. And there's your dose, about 3 to 6 grams of the dried plant daily, so that's above ground part of the plant. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I haven't included any herbs that will interact, except valerian does a little bit if you're on if you're using a lot of alcohol or some of the sedative medications, but the rest of them, there's no interaction. You certainly can have them. There's no problem whatsoever. Yeah. The other thing about these herbs, most people, when they're taking an insomnia formula such as this, I do a formulation that includes skullcap, passion flower, valerian hops, and maybe some oats as well. But the key is not to have it just at night. It doesn't work like a medical sedative where you take the tablet, an hour and a half later you're asleep. What it does is it winds your system down throughout the day, so you can fall asleep a lot better. So I normally give them as a twice daily or 3 times a day dose. So it's not just a before bed dose. So valerian is probably the most well known, even though it's probably not the top of the list for insomnia, but definitely does have some mild tranquilizing and calmative effects. Very good for anxiety or when there's a lot of nervous tension, and we add it into our insomnia regimes. And your dose is about 3 to 6 grams of the dried root daily. If you do buy this root, you have to get a very well sealed container because it smells so bad, or get it as a supplement. And obviously that's probably the only one that I would caution using with sedatives and or alcohol. Now oats. The humble oat is a very old-fashioned herb when we use it medicinally. Now this really treats that mental exhaustion and depression. So these again are the people who are really down and out, very melancholic, don't have much energy, very apathetic. And so it does help to restore their mind somewhat. You only need about 6 grams of the dried green oats daily, and that's just when they're just ripe, when they're harvested to get that. Oatmeal porridge does work as well. It's a great second option, so if you can't get hold of any of these green oats, or oat straw it's called, you certainly can use the oatmeal. And just avoid that if you've got celiac disease. So not every celiac, but there's some celiacs who can't have oats because they have a type of protein in it that's very similar to gluten. Damiana, I get a few people sitting up with this one for good reason. It is a restorative herb to the nervous system, helps treat stress and anxiety, particularly where there's a lot of tension and exhaustion as well. But this is what it's most famous for. It's an aphrodisiac. And you only need about 3 to 6 grams of that dried stem and leaves daily, so the above ground part of the plant there. It grows very easily. So you don't have to walk into a herb store and ask for some Damiana, just grow some. Okay, and the last one I think on this list is Withenia, or ashwagandha as it's otherwise known. It has a whole host of actions, particularly in the context of the nervous system. It's a nice calming sedative. Definitely provides some relief with stress, tension, anxiety. Interestingly, it also helps with learning and memory. Dose is about 3 to 6 grams of the dried root daily. I tend to use this a lot for women actually when they're going through menopause. It seems to work well in that setting. Not that other people can't have it, but for some reason this responds quite well in that period. Now, herbs of the musculoskeletal system. Who here has got arthritis? Yeah, you're going to love this part. All right. Celery, first one on my list. Before I go into the medicinal use of celery, there's a really great juice that you can add to your regime if you've got arthritis, and it's very simple. 1 stick of celery, 2 green apples, 4 carrots. Okay, make a juice of that. Really alkalining, very anti-inflammatory. Very good for any arthritic complaint of any kind, okay? So it's a nice juice that you can have, not too hard to make. You can make up a triple batch and have a couple of days worth sitting there. But yeah, it's a fantastic one. But celery is a part of that recipe. Yeah, so 1 stick of celery, to 2 green apples, to 4 carrots. And you can multiply that, triple, quadruple, whatever you like. And normally, if you're getting a benefit from a juice, you want about 600 mils a day. All right, so benefit of celery is it removes uric acid and potentially other acids by the kidneys. So it's an alkaliner. That's what it does. It alkalines the body. Acid is inflammation, alkaline, anti-inflammatory. So if you think of that as a concept, it is a bit more complex than that, but that's essentially what it does. It helps both gout and all types of arthritis, particularly if you have a lot of acid. So you've got a lot of acid in your diet, a lot of acid accumulation. This will work really well. Now, what you're using in this case medicinally is the seed. So we need about 3 grams of that dried seed daily. And by the way, this works really well with dandelion leaf. Helps to get rid of that acid out of your body. So, I will caution, as with anything, in this case, if you've got lots of inflammation of your kidneys or pregnant, you don't want to use this one. Now, white willow, we spoke about this before a couple of times. Fantastic natural anti-inflammatory. It's probably the leader of the pack if I had to choose anything to help with arthritis. This sometimes I just recommend on its own with that juice. Pretty much relieves lots of things. So even my husband's had a bit of damage to his lower back. When he's sort of got some acute pain, he just goes on white willow bark for a few days. He's right as rain. Within 15 minutes sometimes you can get some relief from this one. So it's a fantastic anti-arthritis for lots of reasons. Yeah, muscular aches and pains, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, gout, they're all arthritic conditions. They can help, even ankylosing spondylitis, the autoimmune disease that causes arthritic problems as well. You can also treat the fever as well. Just remember I talked about that in the previous talk. And there's your dose. 3 grams dried bark daily. I do recommend having that as 2 or 3 divided doses rather than one big dose, because you'll get the benefits more throughout the day. And of course, just remember not to use in children or if you have a salicylate allergy. Now, turmeric, or curcumin, which is the more processed form, is a spice that's become popular for a very good reason. It is also a nice natural anti-inflammatory. It does help for both arthritis and osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. That is your dose. Now, interestingly, I don't know if you've experienced it, but probably only about 50% of my patients get any response at all. And I suspect it is because they're just not absorbing it. And so a lot of preparations now do have those extra processes or extra things within it, whether it's bromelain, black pepper, all those sorts of things are trying to get you to absorb it better. But as I said before, sometimes what they put in there is more harmful to the stomach than any benefit you'll get with your arthritis. So you're best off getting the thoracumin, like I said before, the activated form of it, you won't get that issue. Now, it is a spice. I always do warn some people, if you are prone to getting an irritated stomach, be careful. Also not to use if you have gallstones or a blockage in the bile duct. If you have very high doses, sorry, yes? Not a problem. Yeah, not a problem. There's no blockage there. Yeah. If you push the doses really high, sort of 15 grams of turmeric, you also will run into trouble with thinning your blood too much, so that may interact with blood thinning medications. Bog bean or buck bean, depending on who you speak to. Probably most people have never heard of this one. A very bitter water herb actually, but it has beautiful natural anti-inflammatory benefits. Particularly useful for rheumatoid arthritis, when it's sort of chronic inflammatory autoimmune type arthritis. So not so much for the osteo, but definitely for those autoimmune type ones. And that is your dose there, the 3 grams of the dried leaves daily. So yeah, osteo is wear and tear, rheumatoid is anti-inflammatory. If you don't understand the difference, that's the difference between the two. Osteoarthritis is a wear and tear type arthritis, whereas rheumatoid is an autoimmune disease. Yeah. Have similar symptoms. There are some crossovers in their symptoms, but yeah. Very amazing herb with a very, very bad name. It does look a bit strange, doesn't it, though? Beautiful natural anti-inflammatory. Really good pain relieving benefits with this one. So it's fantastic as well for all your muscle and tendon aches and pains, your lower back pain, painful inflamed joints in either osteo or rheumatoid arthritis, and also gout. And there you have your 1 to 3 grams of dried tuber daily. Combines really well with your celery. So if you want to really get that arthritis moving in the right direction, combine it with that celery. Just one warning on that one, it does lower your blood sugar as well. So if you're a diabetic, just treat that with caution and monitor your sugars a bit better. And meadowsweet, we're down to the last. The final herb, but we're revisiting it from the digestive system, if you remember. But it is also great in the musculoskeletal system. Beautiful natural anti-inflammatory again. Very much an anti-arthritis herb as well. For all your muscle, joints, aches and pains. And there is your dose of 3 grams of the dried flowers and leaves daily. Just a reminder not to use in children or those with salicylate sensitivity.